Hi, my name's Niki, and this is The Interventionalists. And what if I'm only a lesbian because I was abused by men? I think that that's a question that's really important to talk about, especially in the sapphic community. But I also think that it is a topic and a question that's been weaponized against gay people in general, queer people in general. But I'm going to talk about lesbians and sapphics. And I think despite that, I think it's really important to talk about because we know the statistics and numbers of who experiences the most sexual assault and abuse and at the hands of men. They are the main perpetrators of this abuse. If you just search that, you can find statistics anywhere that support that. And because of that, I think it's really important to talk about the concept of how that might affect you in your relationships going forward, but especially in a heteronormative culture or a culture that pushes that it's like a heterosexual institution. Because when that is pushed and homosexuality is considered to be veering off the path, then there's always going to be some justification or some reason that caused you to veer off the path, because they can't imagine that this could be a path that just naturally exists. They have to see it as something that's like a mutilation, and like an accident. Like, this shouldn't have happened. What's the cause of this? Like, for example, so I'm going to talk about some studies that talk about this, but I just think it's important to even say this. There are no studies about why somebody is straight, and it's because that inherently alone just continues to prove the idea that like people really do see homosexuality as potentially something that's just a result of damage, of trauma. There has to be a reason for it. Nobody asks why people are straight. Nobody needs a reason. Simply like asking that question alone is evidence that homosexuality and being a lesbian is still continuously seen as something that needs to be questioned and needs to be justified and potentially reasoned and therefore cured. Because if you're saying that something is caused by trauma, you're saying that there's essentially a cure and that's healing, right? Like, it would change you. You want to get better because trauma is something that's like hurting you. And there's no denying that trauma changes the way that we interact with the world and the way that we see the world. I mean, it changes the way that it changes the way that you walk through the world. It affects you in every sense of the word and in every capacity. Trauma touches you in every aspect of your being, and it's hard to not have your world colored by it in some way or another. But to try and explain why we are one thing and like go back and recount all of our experiences and try to pinpoint one experience to explain why we are one thing, this like one huge aspect of our identity, to try and pinpoint one specific experience out of the millions and millions of experiences that we have, that we collected through over the years, like every second, these experiences, to try and find one and pinpoint it and then think that you can genuinely determine that that is the exact cause, I think is really naive and silly. But I think that's why it's important. I don't know. I guess there's just so much about this topic that I think is important to talk about, but I think even the topic itself, and is one that I think a lot of sapphics like think about, and it's one that exists because obviously there's studies on it. It's inherently rooted in believing that being lesbian, being gay is not normal. It's not natural. It's a mutilation, a coping mechanism, a maladaptive coping mechanism. And so I decided to research on this. And, there's some we have some general, you can just give some general arguments. Okay, then wouldn't there be significantly more straight women that are lesbians? What about the lesbians that experience abuse at the hands of women? Wouldn't they be straight? All these things. But there is actual research into this. And so I read a few different research articles about this. And the one conclusion that stands for sure is that there is little to no, I would say no empirical evidence that supports the idea that trauma determines your sexuality. But based on the different research studies I read, I think maybe they're not even trying to do this, continue to prove the idea or the notion or the argument that sexual orientation precedes experience, particularly trauma. And the reason that I say that, so for example, one research study I read is talking about the concept of essentially studying children that are gender non-conforming, like they present in some gender non-conforming manner as a child, so tracing it all the way back, right? And they're assuming, based on other research related to how lesbians and gay people tend to present themselves, that gender non-conforming children are likely to then identify as gay or lesbian down the road. And with that, the studies essentially prove that children who present as gender non-conforming have a higher likelihood of experiencing abuse. So here's a quote from one of the studies. I'll also put below like what I read if you want to read them. Moreover, given the strict norms guarding gender conformity and people's negative attitudes towards gender nonconforming behavior, individuals who display gender nonconforming behaviors are more likely to be targets for rejection, discrimination, victimization, and physical abuse than their gender conforming counterparts. And in this study, it does say that I didn't like quote this exactly because I'm looking at my notes, but it does categorize children that are gender nonconforming as lesbians and gay individuals, and they're saying that like in adulthood lesbians apparently statistically tend to present in some more masculine way and gay men in a more feminine way, which again like is stereotypes, but that's like how they're basing this study, right? And that alone tells you that there was something that existed, that pre-existed this abuse that caused and led to more abuse or like increase the likelihood of abuse. But if that's your determining factor, then by default, you are arguing that sexual orientation precedes experience, and that includes traumatic experiences. And that's not to say that trauma and abuse doesn't affect the way that you perceive or interact with relationships, because again, trauma, especially in any way like relationship trauma, sexual trauma, that is absolutely going to affect the way that you perceive relationships, your comfort in relationships, your sense of safety in relationships, in all relationships, and especially relationships that are mimicking where that trauma first took place. So of course, it's going to impact the way that you perceive relationships going forward. And that's something that's also acknowledged in this particular study. And it says, specifically Gartner, 1999, another study, suggested that boys who are sexually abused by an older male may perceive the abuse as an indication that they are gay. It has also been speculated that when girls experience sexual abuse perpetrated by men, they may develop an aversion towards sexual relationships with men. They may feel more comfortable in intimate relations with women. Furthermore, the experience of CSA may generate uncertainty about sexual orientation that leads to more experimentation with both opposite and same-sex relationships, regardless of ultimate sexual orientation. It's kind of a mouthful. But this speaks to something that I also think is really interesting, and it's the concept of aversion versus attraction as a side effect of sexual trauma or relationship trauma. Because I understand aversion. I mean, it's like covered. I mean, that's just like inarguable that you would be averse to the thing that has caused you trauma, right? So developing an aversion to someone who reminds you of what has happened to you, or like a population of people who have continued and historically been a perpetrator of this abuse towards you and people like you, of course you would develop an aversion. But that aversion, that traumatic aversion resulting in physical attraction, like causing physical symptoms of attraction to arise in you, to cause you to feel that physical sense of safety and contentment and happiness. Would trauma and aversion quite literally have you turning to the thing that is opposite, apparently, from what has traumatized you, and make your heart beat faster because you're so excited to see this person? Like, would it make your palms sweaty because you're just like so nervous because you like them so much? Would it make you want to go on dates and like hold their hand? Like, would it make you excited to be with this other individual, this other sex, just because you're averse to this one? Or is it more likely, I would argue, that you just become averse to men, and at the very least, if you want to go down this path, you try and get yourself to date women as a way to try and avoid having to date men again, you know, as like in a way, like an attempt to like fix what has happened, or prevent what happened from happening again. That's normal, like wanting to find a way out, but not wanting to give up on the concept of love and relationships. I mean, that's not a crazy idea. I mean, I know a lot of lesbians too who have gone through like really painful experiences with other women, and have tried again to be straight. I've done that. When I got out of an abusive relationship, I was fucked up. I was like truly a mess. If you go back in some of my old videos, I went through a phase where I was like, no, like I'm bisexual. And all my friends were really supportive, but everyone was also like really worried because it's just not me. It's just like not true. And I worked really hard to try and make it true. And I would go on dates with men as a way to try and like, you know, develop, I don't know, an attraction. Because in this moment, I did feel aversion to the people who reminded me of that abuse, you know? And it sounds silly to like associate this whole thing, but when it comes to sexuality, it feels like, okay, I'm going to jump ship, right? Like, it just, I don't know, like in your head, it feels that way, especially if you're gay in particular, because you already are told that this is like an abnormality, unnatural, this is a bad thing. So if it's going badly, maybe you should try and fix it and do the right thing and do the good thing, right? And so, okay, like maybe this will be enough for me to fix myself, right? Particularly with, I think, sapphics and lesbians and gay individuals. But so I tried to date men, and it didn't work. And every week I would go to therapy and be like, no, I think I'm getting there. She would try and be really supportive. And I ended up going on a few dates with men. And the last one I went on, it was a second date I went on with this guy, and I thought he was like nice. So I was like, okay, like maybe I'll feel something. And we went to a theater show, and then during the show I started crying because all I could think was how much happier I would be if I was with a woman. And then I thought to myself, why the fuck am I putting myself back in the closet if I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I don't have to be in the closet? What the fuck am I doing? And then this is kind of a funny story. And then he walked me to my apartment. It was really close. And while we were walking, he was trying to like you just know this, like when someone's like planning to try and kiss you, it was just really uncomfortable. And so I was like trying to face away in every way. And then we get to the door of my apartment complex, and he's trying to like cut me off to block me from going into the door. And then there's people coming out at the same time, and then it's just like a mess. And at this point now I'm holding the door open for this like old couple, and he's just standing there. And then I'm like, they walk out, and I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go inside. And he's trying to like block me, and he goes, what, we're not gonna kiss? And I was like, ugh. I said, no, this is really weird. We're in public. Like, I don't kiss on first dates. And he was like, well, I mean, can't we just go around a corner or in a closet or something? That's like an experience I will never forget, because the fact that he said closet is crazy. The fact that he actually used the word closet, in that moment I was like, no, this is my sign. From whatever divine being there may be, this is literally my sign, because I'm already in there and there's not room for two people. I still have the text, too, that I sent him right after and said, that's really fucking weird to say. Can we go around a corner in a closet? We were also on a sidewalk outside of an apartment complex. After that, I just gave up and realized, you know what, I'm a lesbian. I have to accept it. And I'm going to have to overcome the intimacy issues that I do have now towards women because of the trauma that I faced. And unfortunately, like the generalizations that were now in my head, because I was like, this is already a bad thing and wrong. So why can't I fix myself? And I think that's also very important, which is also something else that I think is important to talk about, because sexuality can be fluid, and when we talk about that, I don't think it means that you're necessarily changing. I think it means that you're growing and understanding yourself. And people are infinitely complex, and we have so many experiences, like infinite experiences in our lifetime, truly. And as a result, we come to understand ourselves more and more. We access different parts of ourselves. We learn different things about ourselves. We open up to different things. We close off to certain things. Trauma causes us to close off, and healing causes us to open up. So if you are someone who identifies as a lesbian maybe right now, and you have experienced trauma with men, and one day you've gone to a lot of therapy and in general have fixed that sort of like overwhelming fear and those intimacy issues that make you maybe particularly afraid of this group of people, and you determine or you find out and you explore that avenue again, that you are attracted to men and you can be, then it's fine. That's a wonderful thing. It means that you've healed. And I just think that's something to be celebrated. I don't think it's something to be condemned, as if like at any point in time your identification as a lesbian or sapphic was inauthentic or invalid, because you were. If you wanted to be with people of the same sex and you were enjoying it and you were happy and you felt that desire and that pull to be around these people, then you are gay. And truly, if your decision to like only pursue women is being, I don't know, further perpetuated or like impacted by your particular aversion to men because of trauma, then that's fine. Then you're gay. Who cares? Like, all that matters is that you feel safe and happy in relationships. And if you feel safe and happy in these relationships and they feel right to you, then that's all that matters. Because at the end of the day, like, we can spend our lives trying to deconstruct who we are. We can ask ourselves why forever. And I do think self-reflection is really important. And I think self-reflecting on like intimacy issues and things that may have caused it as a way to heal so that you can fully enjoy intimacy in any relationship is really important. But when it comes to your sexuality and determining your sexuality and who you are, who you aren't, why you're attracted or not attracted to someone, I think it will truly drive yourself insane, and you don't deserve to have to live in a place where you're constantly questioning whether or not it's okay or healthy or normal for you to be attracted to the same sex. or to not be. Constantly having to find or think about why you might be this way, I think is important to realize that like pretty much inherently is rooted in a form of homophobia. Like, I don't think that you can really argue that. And I just think it's important that no matter what, I think this is why I think this topic can be a dangerous one to talk about it in queer settings, because people will weaponize it and try and use it as a determinant to like push this idea that like homosexuality again is like as a weird coping mechanism, a side effect of something that went wrong. And they will try and become the keepers of what make you authentic. And also people in the queer community might too, if you do change, if you like embrace a sense of fluidity, you discover new things about yourself. There are people who will try and become like the keepers of your authenticity, and it's weird. And it's genuinely rooted in homophobia. There's really no denying that. And I just think that all that matters is whatever relationship you are in, you feel okay and you feel safe. And whether or not you end up identifying as a lesbian forever or for 6 months or 10 years, and then maybe you discover that you're more pansexual or bisexual and you identify as that for the rest of your life, or for a few years, a few months, and then you're like, fuck, I actually think I'm this way. It's fine. Truly, it is fine. It's okay. It's fine. People learn things about themselves. The way that they perceive the world does change. And as that particular part, which I've now talked over quite a bit, so I'm going to reread a little bit of it again. Boys who are sexually abused by older males may perceive the abuse as an indication that they are gay. It has also been speculated that when girls experience sexual abuse perpetrated by men, they may develop an aversion towards sexual relations with men. Thus, they may feel more comfortable in intimate relations with women. The reason that I want to say that again is because your ability to like perceive relationships and feel safe in intimacy in general is going to be affected by your trauma. So when you do heal your trauma, who knows like what will happen to the way that you experience and feel, or how you feel in relationships. Like that's going to affect all of your relationships, and it's going to affect how open you are to any relationship. So like making it a question when it comes down to trauma of whether or not you're straight or gay really comes down to a homophobic idea that like you're veering. Like because no one is asking why you're straight. Nobody is discussing or wants to discuss what about the women who are abused by other women. I talk about domestic violence and abuse that I experienced from another woman. I think it's important to talk about, but no one's saying, well, then why aren't they straight? So the question isn't about whether or not it really matters, or that people don't actually care about your trauma or how your trauma is impacting your relationships. They just care about proving a point, which is that homosexuality is something that is not natural. It's not normal. Or at the very least, further isolates specific individuals who have experienced trauma in the queer community, and that's unfair. That's incredibly unfair. And especially when the majority of people who experience trauma and sexual trauma are people who are women, who are perceived as women, who have been raised as women. And it is incredibly unfair. And I just hate it. I hate when that is something that is brought up. I hate when I think it's important to talk about because of how unfair it is, and how also disheartening and scary it is to continuously be afraid that you're doing something wrong, that you're not right, and that maybe if this thing didn't happen to you that was already horrific and does affect you in every way, your trauma does, if this didn't happen to you, you'd be this other thing, and this other thing that the world has most likely told you is the right thing to be. That's so unfair and makes me emotional to think about, because the people who have experienced this trauma do not deserve to be like analyzed in what path they then follow that makes them feel safe. And again, aversion leading to attraction is crazy. But I'm going to get emotional thinking about it because I hate that. It's not fair. It's just disgusting, in my opinion. But the impact of questions like that make you feel that same feeling. It makes you feel weird and unnatural and disgusting. And it's just not, I don't know, I just keep thinking the same thing. It's not fair. And you don't deserve, if you have experienced something horrific in your past, you don't deserve to have it used as a justification for why or why you feel safe in something else, or why you are being something else or feeling attraction to something else, because there's nothing wrong with you being in these other relationships. And again, like, healing your intimacy issues and trauma is important, and maybe that'll like alter the way that you perceive relationships and have you like enter a more fluid state or embrace it for a little bit. But even in the meantime, having other people push that idea towards you is what's wrong. Your own self-reflection and self-introspection regarding your relationships with intimacy and relationships in general after experiencing trauma, like relationship trauma and whatever relations, that is something deeply personal to you and something that only you get to decide and decipher the impact and analyze. Other people do not get to do that. It's not fair without just telling you that, well, it's not really normal for you to be gay. Like, haven't you figured it out yet? Like, maybe if you fix yourself, you'll be straight. Go to therapy and work really hard to fix yourself, all of your trauma and all of your issues, and maybe you'll be better. It's just silly, in my opinion. And also, see, now I'm just kind of ranting. Something that I think is a little bit funny is that in these studies, so like there's been quite a few studies on this topic in general. And in this one study where I've referenced these different couple quotes, it talks about the use of handedness like as a study, and they were determining that if you were left-handed, you were going to be categorized as gay or likely to be gay, or like, again, determining then that you're again, this all goes back to you already think that they are of this sexual orientation, and it is impacting their like what hand they use. So you already are saying it precedes experience, sexual orientation. But they like have done these studies conducted on if you have a left hand, that means you're gay, and then like studied the trauma that you experienced in childhood. It's just like a very weird, because they can't determine it because they're children, and you can't be like what is or what is not your sexuality, all this stuff. But how silly is that? Like being like, I'm going to study, we're going to make an assumption that if you're left-handed, you're gay. We're going to like, that is incredibly inconsistent and unreliable and just like pretty silly. I'm right-handed. I'm a lesbian. All my friends who are lesbians are right-handed. So it just like goes to show that I think these studies really have no way to root, to really ground themselves in anything significant or really controlled enough to even have a study that can be reliable and consistent. And I think it also, because they're like really going out on a limb to the point that they're going to be like, well, if you're gay, you have a left hand, we're just going to base it on that. Just to me, just shows like this study in general is really unnecessary. You have to like reach really far to even do it. And the question should be, why do you feel like you need to do this study? This question in particular. I think the question should be, why do children who present in a gender nonconforming way in childhood experience more trauma and abuse? Not whether or not their sexuality preceded that or was a result of that or impacted by it. That's just my take. Also, something else. So I'm going to make a video that I've already been like researching about repetition compulsion, which is like the concept of repeating past trauma, like compulsively, essentially, like as a way to process, even like subconsciously. And should that theory be correct, and most sapphics and lesbians have experience because they're women or they were raised as women or were part of that population that were obviously impacted by the abuse of men, like what we're talking about. And if repetition compulsion is correct and they're repeating past trauma, wouldn't then they continue to potentially pursue relationships with men as a way to sort of process that trauma, like that compulsion to process and almost master that trauma? That's like the concept, which I'll talk about in another video. But wouldn't that cause them to veer back towards or stay on the path of heterosexuality as a way to try and fix the trauma in and of itself, not even about like sexuality in general, fix the trauma in and of itself, and that trauma was rooted in heterosexuality. So in order to compulsively repeat it, you would need to stay in that bubble or that boat. And so, I don't know, I know a lot of lesbians who do not do that, who have experienced trauma with men and do not do that. I also know that that is something sapphics and lesbians experience. They have trauma with men and they struggle with their relationship with men and sexual validation and feeling validated and deconstructing objectification and the tide of worth and value to men, all these things. But again, I just think that's worth asking if we want to tie in other research that a lot of people believe in psychology, which is repetition compulsion. I guess that's it. I'm running out of things to say. I was like looking at my notes. But I will just end it saying this again, which I I just want this to be like the core takeaway from this video, if anyone's watching it, is that if you have experienced trauma in any capacity and at the hands of men, and you identify as a lesbian or sapphic, or you've experienced trauma and you're gay in general, just know that it doesn't matter. Even if one day people come out with a plethora of research that apparently proves that impacted your sexual orientation, if you're happy in your relationships and you feel safe, that's enough. You are just as queer and gay as anyone else. And you have just as much a place in the queer community as anybody else. And if you do change at any capacity in your life, change, grow into yourself, heal, experience more trauma, close yourself off, open up again. These are all beautiful things. Like, the concept of healing and opening yourself up to like being able to explore sexuality even further is a beautiful thing, and it's not something that you should be ashamed about, and it doesn't take away from the authenticity of like when you identified as maybe a lesbian or whatever you identify as right now that might be called into question because of this. That's a wonderful thing and should be celebrated if you get to a point where you feel safe enough to do that, and maybe you find your way back to the label lesbian, or maybe you don't, but it's a beautiful thing to heal and get to a point where you can re-explore that. So if anyone tries to become the keeper of your identity validity and your sexuality validity and your authenticity, they can truly fuck off, and I feel bad for them. And your healing should be celebrated, genuinely. And I'm trying to think what else I should add. Yeah, I just think that's what I want to make sure. Anyone watching this, that's what matters. Your safety and your happiness. And if you're averse to men and you were once attracted to them and now you're just averse, but you are attracted to women and you feel safe with women, you only want to pursue women, you're just as gay as anyone else. Okay. People already think that there's a ton of reasons why we're gay, so why does it matter if that's the one? People think it's because you're sick. My dad thought it was because people were sick. He's better now, but or not so homophobic, but my dad thought it was because gay people were sick. Some people think that it's a choice. Some people think that it's biological. There's all these different reasons. If this is the reason, it's just as valid as anyone else's. I swear. It's stupid. It's such a stupid question, and it's a really fucked up, disgusting thing to weaponize against somebody who's already faced something unfair and horrific already. And so if their healing results in them feeling safe in relationships that are abnormal, like, why do you want them to feel unsafe? I don't know. I could talk about this for way too long, so I'm going to stop. Okay. Well, I'll just say this to end it, which I always say. I have a website. If you have any experiences related to this or anything in general, genuinely, literally anything, something that's just like affecting you, that's like heavy on your heart, or something that you've like thought out, like a philosophical thought or opinion, I would love to hear it, whether or not it's in the comments, or I'll put it down below. But I have a submissions page on my website and also my email, and if you want a reason to talk about it and you want a space to talk about it, this will always be your space, whether it's in my email or you want it put on a website. You always have a space to do that here, or in the comments. This is just as much yours as it is anyone else's. And if you want someone to read it, but you don't want anyone else to read it, you can email it to me and I will read it. You'll have one person who hears you out. And if you want it to be put online, anonymously or not, for maybe other people to see and connect with, I can also do that. But bottom line is, I know these are hard topics to talk about. And I think that we don't, honestly, though, get enough of an opportunity to talk about them as queer people, because any hardships you face as a queer person is immediately weaponized by people who think that are homophobic as a way to push the idea and the agenda that homosexuality is wrong, it's maladaptive, it's unnatural. But we deserve a space to talk about this stuff because it still affects us and it still impacts us. And these are, at the end of the day, relationships like any other that have ups and downs. It's just unfortunate that because of heterosexual, homophobic cultures, our honesty and our exploration of our experiences are continuously weaponized against us. So this is your space. Just want to say that. And anyone who is stupid or rude in the comments gets blocked. So don't have to worry about that. They won't engage with you. And then I also make videos on YouTube and this is YouTube. I also make videos on TikTok and Instagram. And I upload these to Spotify if you just want to listen to them. And yeah, I think that's it. I'm going to be uploading another video on Sunday. And okay. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching, if you did, and have a good day. Bye.